She wants to be a lawyer. The way she discussed being a lawyer, I could see that spark in her eye, and it made me so happy.
We had a bank robbery in progress with shots fired.
Our manager's been shot.
Wanted. She's putting her freedom on the line and possibly her life.
January 6th, 2016. It's a cold Wednesday afternoon in Little Rock, Arkansas, just before 2 o'clock. 911 calls flood into the police department. Bank robbery in progress. Shots fired. A man is down. Officers arrive within minutes at the quiet branch off Highway 10, weapons drawn, not knowing if the shooter is still inside. What they find is a scene of senseless violence. Sam Lewis, the bank manager, lies on the floor surrounded by blood. A shotgun blast has torn through his shoulder and nearly severed his ring finger. The tellers are in shock. The suspect is gone. I really, in my mind, thought we were going to lose him, one colleague would say later. The terror was real. A routine afternoon shattered by a masked teenager with a sawed-off shotgun who had the money in his hands, had reached the door, and then turned back and fired anyway. Police have one crucial lead. An eyewitness saw the getaway driver, a young woman behind the wheel of a maroon car. Within hours, investigators would trace that vehicle to a name, an address, and a story that would reveal the devastating cost of the wrong kind of love. But this story begins much earlier, with a bright young woman who had dreams of helping others. This story is about love, loyalty, and the devastating cost of losing yourself in the wrong person. Before we dive in, please drop a quick comment. What are you doing right now while you listen? Driving? Working? Or just taking a moment? I truly appreciate you being here. Quick note, some details are recreated for storytelling purposes. The message is what matters most. Jaisha Howard, 18 years old, dreamed of becoming a lawyer who gave voice to people who had none. She was compassionate, bright, and headed toward a future built on helping others. That was before the spring afternoon in 2015 when she saw Tyrone Randolph at a basketball court in Little Rock. He was 16, charming, confident, living what people in the neighborhood called the street life. She felt it instantly. That pull some people describe as fate and others recognize as the beginning of losing yourself. Her family saw it too. Her aunt pulled her aside after the first week. "The only thing I told him," she would say later, "be careful." Jaisha didn't listen. Over the following months, she devoted herself entirely to Tyrone. Phone calls with friends went unanswered. Family dinners were skipped. The college application materials that had once covered her bedroom desk disappeared into a drawer. She was building a life with him. Or so she believed. A life where her voice mattered only when it echoed his. By late 2015, the isolation was complete. She spent nearly every day at Tyrone's house, her world shrinking to the size of his needs, his moods, his plans. Then came the unprotected sex, and weeks before January 6, 2016, Tyrone looked at her with absolute certainty. "We're going to have a baby," he said. "I know it." She believed him. How does love make someone believe something without proof, without even asking for proof? No pregnancy test? No doctor's visit. Just his word and her trust, wrapped together so tightly she couldn't see where one ended and the other began. She believed she was pregnant because he said so. That belief would change everything. It gave Tyrone something he needed: urgency, a reason, a story to tell her about why he had to act, why they needed money now, why the plan forming in his mind was the only way forward. She had dreamed of giving a voice to people who had none. Instead, she had given hers away to a boy who was about to use it against her. Outside Tyrone's house, a maroon car sat in the driveway. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of detail no one notices until it matters. It was registered in Tyrone's full legal name, the name the state of Arkansas had on file, the name that connected him to an address, to a life, to every choice he was about to make. In less than 3 weeks, that single detail would bring police to this exact door. The car would be the thread investigators pulled, unraveling everything Tyrone thought he had planned and everything Jaisha thought she was building. But that was still ahead of them. Invisible in the cold January air, for now. Jaisha sat inside, one hand resting on her stomach, believing in a future that didn't exist and a pregnancy that was never real. 3 weeks. That was all the time between the maroon car sitting quietly in the driveway and the moment it carried them toward a crime that would define the rest of their lives. January 6, 2016. Just before 2 in the afternoon. Tyrone Randolph pulled the clown mask over his face and pushed open the bank door. The sawed-off shotgun in his hands made his intentions clear before he said a word. Inside. 2 tellers stood behind the counter on what had been, until that moment, an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Behind them, Sam Lewis, 43, the manager of this quiet branch off Highway 10, looked up from his desk. The tellers didn't hesitate. No alarms, no resistance. They opened the drawers and handed over the cash. Nearly $3,000 in bills that Tyrone stuffed into his pockets. The entire transaction took less than 90 seconds. He had what he came for. The door was 5 steps away. The getaway car, the maroon sedan with Jaisha waiting behind the wheel, was running in the parking lot. He could have walked out. The tellers had given him everything without a fight. No one had moved toward a panic button. No one had tried to stop him. The money was in his hands. The exit clear. The plan working exactly as he'd imagined it. Keep that detail in mind. But Tyrone stopped at the threshold. He turned back toward the manager's desk, where Sam Lewis stood watching. They locked eyes. Later. Sam would describe that moment with chilling clarity. "We essentially locked eyes," he said. "And that's when something just told me he's about to shoot. Why does someone who already has what they came for turn back and destroy a life?" The shotgun blast shattered the silence. The pellets tore through Sam's left shoulder and nearly severed his ring finger, the bone hanging by threads of tissue. He dropped to the floor, blood spreading across the tile. "It seemed like everything went in slow motion," he would say later. "I knew that I was severely injured, and I was just determined not to die there on that bank floor. There had been no provocation, no threat. No reason that made sense to anyone except the 16-year-old boy in the clown mask. The tellers had cooperated. Sam had stayed behind his desk. Tyrone had already won. But winning wasn't enough. He needed someone to know he'd been there, to carry the scar of that Wednesday afternoon for the rest of their life. The gunpowder smell hung in the air as Tyrone turned and ran. The clown mask came off somewhere between the bank floor and the parking lot. Behind him, Sam Lewis pressed his good hand against the wound, blood pooling beneath him, fighting to stay conscious. Outside in the maroon car, Jaisha heard the gunshot, a single crack that split the cold January air. The sound was unmistakable, final. She didn't know whether the person bleeding on that bank floor was a stranger whose name she would learn later or the father of the child she believed she was carrying. All she knew was that the plan had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Then Tyrone burst through the bank door and threw himself into the passenger seat, and the maroon car peeled away from the curb. Jaisha drove, hands steady, eyes forward, following the route back to his house as if they'd just finished running errands. Neither spoke about the gunshot or what it meant. Not yet. Minutes later, they pulled into the driveway. Tyrone's mother was home that afternoon, unaware of what her son had just done. They walked inside and hid the evidence, the gun, the stolen cash, the clown mask, in familiar places. Then they sat down in the living room, The television played in the background. Hours later, when police came knocking, she would tell them the truth as she knew it. They didn't seem like they'd just robbed a bank. That ability to compartmentalize, to sit calmly as if the violence happened to someone else, separates people who commit crime once from people who can do it and move on to dinner. Jacia finally broke the silence. "Did you shoot somebody?" she asked. Tyrone looked at her, his face unreadable. "I'll tell you later," he said. 2 rooms, separated by miles and a universe of consequence. In one life, hung by a thread in the other. 2 teenagers sat on a couch, waiting for the adrenaline to fade. At the hospital, Sam Lewis lay on a gurney surrounded by blood. The pellets had torn through muscle and bone, leaving his shoulder shattered and his ring finger barely attached. His colleagues, the people who had worked alongside him for years, stood in the emergency waiting room, praying he would survive. "I really in my mind thought we were going to lose him," one would say later. The doctors worked quickly, but the damage was severe. Sam would live, but he would carry the scars forever, the kind that ache on cold mornings and interrupt sleep years later. Back at the house, Jacia and Tyrone settled into the illusion of safety. They had driven away clean. No one had chased them. The car sat in the driveway, unremarkable as it had been that morning. They believed, in the way desperation meets wishful thinking, that they might actually get away with it. But someone outside that bank had seen the face behind the mask. A woman leaving work early had watched as the shooter yanked off the clown disguise beside the maroon sedan. She saw his face clearly. Young, male, panic starting to show. And she did what witnesses so rarely manage in moments of chaos. She wrote down the license plate number, every digit, every letter, exact. While Jacia and Tyrone sat in that living room, the woman was already at a police station, giving investigators a detailed description. The car, the face, the plate. In a case that could have gone cold, no clear fingerprints, no usable security footage, that single piece of handwritten evidence was about to unravel everything. The license plate was being run through the system at that very moment. But at the crime scene itself, Detective Martin stood in the middle of the ransacked bank and felt the investigation slipping away before it had even begun. He had worked violent crimes in Little Rock for over a decade, but armed robberies with shootings still made his stomach turn, especially when the evidence wasn't there. The crime scene team worked methodically through the bank, photographing evidence markers and dusting surfaces. They found shell casings on the floor near where Sam Lewis had fallen. They bagged fibers from the clown mask. They collected blood samples from the tile, though those would only confirm what everyone already knew: someone had been shot, and badly. But the forensic evidence that could identify a suspect, almost nothing. Chances of finding his DNA would be pretty slim, one investigator said. Scanning the entry area, the shooter had been careful, gloves the entire time. He touched the doors, but he had gloves on. No clear fingerprints on the counter. No saliva on the mask. No careless moment where he'd removed protection and left a trace of himself behind. The security footage showed a figure in a clown mask and dark clothing. But the angle was wrong and the image quality poor, no distinguishing features, no visible skin, nothing a jury could use. The witnesses were traumatized tellers who had kept their eyes down, following their training, seeing nothing but the barrel of a shotgun and the grotesque grin of a mass-produced Halloween mask. Detective Martin exchanged a look with the lead investigator. They both knew what this meant. "We were thinking this was going to be a hard crime to solve," he would admit later. "The kind that sits in a file for months, then years, waiting for a confession that never comes or a tip that arrives too late." How many masked gunmen walk away into ordinary afternoons, never to be caught up? The answer, in cities across America, is more than anyone wants to admit. Surveillance that doesn't capture faces. Witnesses too scared or too shocked to remember details. Evidence that points to a crime but not to a person. The system is built to solve cases with DNA, fingerprints, clear video, the forensic anchors that turn suspicion into certainty. Without them, even the most violent crimes can dissolve into unsolved statistics. Detective Martin stood near the bloodstain where Sam Lewis had collapsed. The faint smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. Police radios crackled in the background. Outside, traffic moved past on Highway 10, ordinary and indifferent. Somewhere in this city, a 16-year-old was sitting in a living room, believing he'd gotten away with it. And based on what the crime scene was giving them, he might be right. The detective was preparing to call his captain with the grim update they had almost nothing to work with when movement caught his eye. One of the bank employees who had left early was walking back toward the scene. She looked shaken, her hands trembling, but she approached him directly. She had something to say. And it changed everything. The eyewitness was still trembling as she told Detective Martin what she had seen from the parking lot. She was a bank employee who had been leaving early for the day when chaos erupted behind her, and she had been paying attention. She was putting her belongings in her car when she heard the gunshot. The sound made her freeze, then turn toward the bank entrance. A figure burst through the door's mail, wearing a clown mask, moving fast. He ran toward a maroon sedan idling near the curb. Behind the wheel sat a young biracial woman, her hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes wide. Then the shooter made his mistake. Right there, in the parking lot, in broad daylight, with a witness standing 20 feet away. He yanked off the clown mask. The eyewitness saw his face clearly. She saw him without the mask, Detective Martin would report later. It was a young black male, young, maybe a teenager, panic starting to show around the edges. But not enough to stop him from climbing into the passenger seat as if he'd done this before. The mask had been worn to hide his identity inside the bank, where cameras and terrified employees would only see a grotesque Halloween costume and a weapon. But the shooter had removed it too soon, feet from a witness with a clear view, a good memory, and the presence of mind to act. She watched the maroon car pull away, and she did what so few witnesses manage in moments of shock. She wrote down the license plate number. Every digit, every letter. She provided a description of the license plate that was on the car, the report would note. Exact and unhesitating. The kind of detail that turns a dead-end investigation into a solvable case. The mask had been useless. He took it off right there. Beside a car registered in his own name, Detective Martin took the plate number and ran it through the system, his hands moving quickly across the keyboard. The database returned a result within seconds. The maroon sedan was registered to a 16-year-old male. The license plate gave them a name, Tyrone Randolph, an address in Little Rock, less than 3 miles from where they stood. No priors for armed robbery, but a juvenile record that suggested this wasn't his first brush with the law. 16 years old, still young enough to need a parent's signature on most legal documents. Old enough to be tried as an adult for attempted murder. The system would make that calculation soon enough. For now, what mattered was the address. Detective Martin radioed for backup. Units began moving toward the residence. Lights off, keeping it quiet until they were in position. If they moved fast, if the suspects hadn't run, if they were sitting at home believing they'd gotten away with it, the maroon car might still be there. The gun might still be there. The stolen cash. The mask. The evidence that would tie a name to a crime scene 3 miles, minutes away. The case that had seemed impossible an hour ago was now a matter of knocking on a door. 3 miles took less than 10 minutes. The maroon car sat in the driveway exactly where the registration said it would be: ordinary, unremarkable, waiting. Patrol officers moved into position around the house with weapons drawn, cutting off every exit. Detective Martin gave the signal to hold and wait. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, Tyrone and Jaisha emerged from the front door and walked toward the maroon sedan, moving like people who had somewhere ordinary to go. Maybe they were planning to drive somewhere and ditch the car. Maybe they genuinely believed the worst was behind them. Either way, the moment they opened the car doors, the trap closed. Lights flooded the driveway red, blue, blinding. Sirens shattered the quiet evening. Officers emerged from every angle, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. "Get out of the vehicle! Hands where we can see them!" Jaisha froze, her face a mask of confusion that looked almost genuine. She stepped out slowly, hands raised, her voice rising in protest. "What's this about? We ain't done nothing!" She looked from officer to officer, as if this were some terrible mistake, as if she couldn't imagine why armed police would surround a maroon car registered to a 16-year-old boy less than 5 hours after an armed robbery. Tyrone said nothing at first. He stepped out of the passenger side, hands already up, head down. Then quietly, almost like a confession, "I know what this is about." That was all Detective Martin needed to hear. Jaisha kept protesting, kept playing dumb, but Tyrone's response told police everything they needed to know. Guilty people either run, fight, or fold. He was folding. Less than 5 hours after the shooting, both suspects were in handcuffs. The speed of it was remarkable. A witness who stayed calm. A license plate written down with precision. A database that returned a name and address. A car sitting exactly where it should be, with the suspects inside, believing somehow that they could drive away into a normal evening. Most armed robberies with this little forensic evidence go unsolved for months, if ever. This one was over before the sun went down. Officers separated Jaisha and Tyrone into different patrol cars before either could say another word. Through the window, Jaisha was still talking, still insisting this was a mistake. Tyrone sat silent, staring at his hands. Detective Martin turned toward the house. The gun was in there, the clown mask, the stolen cash. Probably still bundled the way the tellers had handed it over. Somewhere in that ordinary Little Rock home was the physical evidence that would connect 2 teenagers to a violent crime evidence they'd had hours to hide, destroy, or move, but hadn't. Tyrone's mother stood in the doorway, her face stricken, asking what was happening. Detective Martin explained they needed to search the house. She looked at her son in the back of the patrol car, then back at the officer, and said yes. No warrant needed, no resistance. Just a mother, watching her child's life collapse, and knowing that whatever was hidden inside would only make it worse. What they found in the back bedroom would make every denial, every lie, completely meaningless. The consent was all they needed. Detective Martin pulled on latex gloves and stepped into the back bedroom while Tyrone's mother watched from the doorway, her arms crossed. "I don't want that gun or anything like that in my house," she said quietly, as if saying it now could undo what her son had brought home. The detective started between the wall and the bed, the place people hide things they need close but out of sight. His hand closed around metal cold steel with a sawed-off barrel. He pulled the shotgun free carefully. The barrel was still faintly warm. Hours had passed since the shooting, but the weapon remembered. Beside it, wedged into the same gap, was a spent shell casing. 1 shot fired, 1 casing ejected. The ballistics team would match it to the casing from the bank floor. but Detective Martin already knew. This was the gun that had torn through Sam Lewis's shoulder. He kept searching. The clown mask came next. Stuffed underclothes, cheap Halloween plastic with grotesque painted features and empty eye holes. Then the saw, still flecked with metal shavings from where the shotgun barrel had been shortened. They hadn't disposed of anything. The gun, the mask, the tools, the evidence that could send them to prison, it was all there, hours after the crime. Most criminals who get home after a violent robbery spend those hours destroying evidence, wiping prints, getting rid of anything connecting them to the scene. Tyrone and Jaisha had sat on a couch and watched television. Every piece of evidence from the robbery weapon. Proceeds was sitting in a teenager's bedroom like trophies. Then Detective Martin found the money. Nearly $3,000 in cash, still bundled in the stacks the tellers had handed over, stuffed inside a purse. Not a backpack, not a duffel bag, a purse. It was a gold mine in there, he would say later. They found everything they were looking for. But the purse raised a question. It wasn't Tyrone's. Detectives believed it belonged to Jaisha. If the stolen money was in her purse, then her role wasn't just getaway driver claiming ignorance. The purse placed her at the center of the conspiracy, someone who knew about the plan, who provided means to carry the cash, who was in it from the beginning. Evidence doesn't just prove what happened. It proves who planned it. Back at the police station, Tyrone sat in an interrogation room with his head in his hands. The patrol car ride had been silent, the booking process procedural. But now, alone in a small room with fluorescent lights and a bolted table, the weight of it seemed to settle on him. Detective Martin laid out photographs of every item recovered from the bedroom. The shotgun, the mask, the cash in the purse. Tyrone looked up and said he wanted to talk. He would tell them everything. He did. Tyrone Randolph spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. He was 16 years old, and he was about to destroy the girl who loved him. The confession came easily. Traded for the promise of a lighter sentence. Detective Martin sat across the metal table, pen moving steadily across his notepad, recorder capturing every word. Tyrone laid it out methodically, step by step, like someone recounting a grocery list rather than armed robbery and attempted murder. The motive was simple. Jaisha believed she was pregnant. They needed money for the baby. I said, "Look, I'm going to make some money," Tyrone told the detective, not we, I. As if the plan had been his alone. As if she'd been a bystander to her own choices. But then came the details that placed Jaisha at the center of everything. Because he wasn't old enough. He got Jaisha to buy him the gun, Detective Martin would report later. Tyrone was 16, too young to purchase a firearm legally. So Jaisha, 18 and madly in love, went to a seller and bought the shotgun for him. She knew what it was for. She watched him saw off the barrel in preparation. She drove him to the bank and waited in the maroon car as his getaway driver. Tyrone didn't hesitate, didn't protect her, didn't soften a single detail. He named her as the gun buyer, the witness to his preparation, the driver who made it all possible. Every sentence pulled her deeper into culpability, and his voice never wavered. Not once did he pause to consider what this confession would cost the girl waiting in the next room. Before we hear his version of what happened in that final moment, drop your prediction in the comments. Do you think the shooting was accidental or intentional? One sentence is all we need. Please note the next part includes some recreated details for storytelling purposes. The lesson is what matters. Then, Tyrone reached the moment that would define the rest of the case. He'd already gotten the money. The tellers had cooperated. He was at the door, seconds from escape. Sam Lewis stood near his desk, watching but not intervening. And then, according to Tyrone, it just happened. "I didn't mean to shoot him," he said, his tone as flat as everything else he'd confessed. But the gun, went off. His hands had been sweaty, he claimed. The weapon slipped. The trigger pulled itself. An accident. Pure and simple, a tragic mistake born of nerves and circumstance. Not intent. Detective Martin wrote it down, keeping his face neutral. But he didn't believe a word of it.
She felt that she became an attorney, that she could help those without a voice to be their voice.
The cost of blind loyalty. And the way one lie can detonate a dozen lives. The story of Jaisha Howard and Tyrone Randolph ends not with redemption or closure, but with a haunting question about the price we pay for the wrong kind of love. This case stands as a reminder of what can happen when love demands everything and gives nothing back. Sam Lewis survived that January afternoon, but his life was forever changed by 3 minutes of senseless violence. He carries physical scars that will never fully heal, and the emotional weight of forgiving someone who nearly killed him for no reason at all. His story deserves to be remembered, not just as a victim of a crime, but as a man who showed extraordinary grace in the face of unimaginable pain. For Jaisha Howard, the lesson came too late. She wanted to give voice to the voiceless, but lost her own voice in a relationship built on manipulation and control. The ride-or-die culture that glorifies blind loyalty doesn't tell you the cost, that standing by someone no matter what can mean standing in the ruins of your own future. Love should never ask you to erase yourself.
We essentially locked eyes, and that's when something just told me he's about to shoot.
Sacrifice your dreams. When devotion becomes destruction, it's not love anymore. If this story moved you, please subscribe to stay connected to more true crime cases like this. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. What struck you most about this case? And if you know someone who needs to hear this, message about the danger of losing yourself in the wrong person. Please share this video. Thank you for listening with respect and care. This story is based on a real case that took place in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2016. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling purposes, but the core
The witness then saw the shooter take off his mask.
facts, the crime, the victim's survival, and the devastating consequences are real. Our deepest respect goes to Sam Lewis and all those affected by this tragedy.
It was a gold mine in there. They found everything they were looking for.
Tape that he had every opportunity to walk out of the building with the money and accomplish his goal, but he was determined that he was going to fire a shot before he left that building. He intentionally rocked back and pulled the trigger.
Man, I'm sorry that I made these choices that harmed you and your family. I own full responsibility for my actions.